In the spring of 1918, the German Empire was making its final, desperate gamble to win the First World War. On the Eastern Front, Russia had collapsed, freeing up nearly 1 million veteran soldiers to be hurled at the Allied lines in France. This was the Kaiserschlacht, the Spring Offensive, a series of colossal hammer blows designed to shatter the British and French armies before the full might of America could be brought to bear. The offensive began in March with Operation Michael, which tore a massive hole in the British lines. In April, the Germans launched the second phase, Operation Georgette, in the Flanders region of Belgium. Their objective was to smash through the British lines, capture the vital railway hub of Hazebrouck, and push the British Expeditionary Force into the sea. The German stormtroopers, elite and experienced, advanced with terrifying speed. The British lines buckled and then broke. Divisions that had stood firm for years were swept away in a tide of gray uniforms. The situation was catastrophic. The British commander, Field Marshal Douglas Haig, issued a now-famous order of the day. With our backs to the wall, and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end. But in the path of this German juggernaut, holding a critical section of the line, stood a small, exhausted, and severely understrength brigade. They were not British. They were men from a distant land, a so-called colonial unit. They were the 1st South African Infantry Brigade, and they were about to be ordered to hold their ground to the last man, to sacrifice themselves completely to buy the Allies a few precious hours. This is the hidden story of one of the most heroic and tragic last stands of the entire war. It's the tale of how a doomed brigade, surrounded and outnumbered 10-1, fought with such incredible ferocity that they halted the German advance and saved the British army from total disaster. This is the story of the South Africans at Messines Ridge. The men of the 1st South African Brigade were no strangers to hell. They were volunteers, a unique mix of English-speaking city dwellers and Afrikaans-speaking farmers who had put aside their own country's recent history of conflict to fight for the British Empire. They had already earned a fearsome reputation for their tenacity. In 1916, at the Battle of the Somme, they had been ordered to capture a place called Delville Wood. For 6 days and 5 nights, they fought in a shattered, burning forest against relentless German counterattacks. When they were finally relieved, of the 3,150 men who had entered the wood, only 143 walked out. They had held the line. Now, 2 years later, they were being asked to do it again. By April 10, 1918, the situation was desperate. The Germans had smashed through the Portuguese division holding the line to the south, and their stormtroopers were pouring through the gap, threatening to encircle the entire British Second Army. The key to the whole defensive line in the area was the Messines Ridge, a piece of high ground that had been captured by the British with enormous loss of life just a year earlier in a famous battle that began with the detonation of 19 massive mines. To lose this ridge would be a strategic and psychological disaster. And holding the northern part of this vital ridge was the South African Brigade. They were already exhausted, having been rushed into the line to plug a gap. They were severely under strength. But their orders were absolute. The ridge must be held. The commander of their division told the South African commander, "You must hold the line. Under no circumstances will any withdrawal take place." It was a death sentence and everyone knew it. The Germans began their assault on the South African positions on the morning of April 10th. A massive artillery barrage rained down, turning the already scarred landscape into a smoking, heaving sea of mud and fire. Then the stormtroopers attacked, advancing in waves under the cover of mist and smoke. The South Africans, spread thinly across a wide front, fought back with disciplined fury. Their Lewis guns and Vickers machine guns chattered, cutting down the advancing German infantry. But the Germans were everywhere. They infiltrated the flanks, surrounding the South African positions one by one. The fighting quickly devolved into a series of isolated, desperate battles. Small pockets of men, cut off from their headquarters and from each other, fought on in their shattered trenches and shell craters. Communication broke down. Runners sent with messages were killed in the relentless shellfire. The South Africans were alone. For 3 days, the battle raged. The Germans, expecting the colonials to break and run, were stunned by the ferocity of their resistance. The South Africans refused to surrender. When their machine guns were destroyed, they fought with rifles. When their rifles jammed with mud, they fought with bayonets and trench clubs. When they were overrun, they launched suicidal counterattacks to retake their lost trenches. A German officer, captured later, described the fighting. "We could not understand it. These men were surrounded. They had no hope, yet they would not stop fighting. They were like cornered devils." The situation for the South Africans was hopeless. They were being attacked from the front, from the flanks, and from the rear. Their casualties were horrific. Ammunition was running out. They had no food and no water. Wounded men lay dying in the bottom of the trenches with no hope of evacuation. Yet they held on. Every hour they could delay the German advance was another hour for the British to rush reinforcements to the rear and form a new defensive line. And so, they fought for time, paying for every precious minute with their lives. By the morning of April 12th, the brigade had been effectively destroyed. The last message from the remnants of one battalion was a single, defiant line: "We are holding out to the last." After that, there was only silence. Of the entire South African brigade that had held the line, only a few hundred men managed to escape the encirclement, fighting their way out in small groups through the German lines. The rest were killed, wounded, or captured. They had been ordered to hold to the last man, and they had come terrifyingly close to doing so. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The 3 days they had bought with their blood were just enough. The British and Australian divisions, rushed to the scene, were able to form a new defensive line behind Messines Ridge. The German advance, having lost momentum and suffered heavy casualties in its fight with the South Africans, was halted. The road to the vital railway hub was blocked. Operation Georgette had failed. The German spring offensive, their last great hope for victory, had been stopped. The story of the 1st South African Brigade's last stand at Messines is a tale of incredible, almost unbelievable courage. It is a story that is often forgotten, overshadowed by the larger narrative of the war. But for the men who were there, and for the generals who understood the stakes, it was a pivotal moment. The South Africans were given an impossible task. They were sacrificed to save the army, and they did not flinch. They stood their ground, fought until they were practically annihilated, and in doing so, they played a crucial role in stopping the offensive that could have lost the Allies the war. Their sacrifice is a powerful reminder that the history of war is not just written by famous generals and grand strategies. It is written in the mud and blood of ordinary men asked to do extraordinary things. The men from the cities and farms of South Africa, fighting for an empire in the fields of Flanders, were given a choice between retreat and annihilation. They chose to stand. And in making that choice, this doomed brigade didn't just save a ridge, they helped save the entire Allied cause. Their stand at Messines in 1918 is a hidden front of history, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest victories are born from the most desperate of last stands.